40 feet below the street level of Washington, D.C., tucked right under the old post office, sits a massive cistern that should not exist according to the city's own history. When you look at the construction records from 1891, the paperwork says no excavation went deeper than 12 feet, which leaves us with a massive 28-foot gap between the official story and the physical reality of the ground. This is not some small rounding error or a simple clerical slip-up by a tired clerk, but rather a massive discrepancy that challenges what we think we know about the city's foundation. This video is about that specific gap, and we are not going to focus on wild claims or the theories you have already heard a dozen times on the internet. Instead, we are looking strictly at what the measurements tell us. Most people who talk about underground networks start with a flashy conclusion and then try to find facts that fit their narrative, which is exactly why so many serious researchers dismiss the subject entirely. They decide a structure is mysterious first, then they go hunting for details that feel consistent with that mystery while ignoring everything else. We are doing the exact opposite here by starting with the boring stuff like building permits, municipal survey records and restoration reports. These primary sources are the foundation of this analysis because they consist of paperwork that is publicly available and physical structures that you can still go out and measure yourself. You will not find any oral traditions, second-hand stories, or unsourced forum posts in this breakdown. The reason this approach matters so much is that it fundamentally changes what you can actually claim about these sites. When your starting point is physical evidence and documented records, the distance between those two things becomes a hard fact rather than just another interpretation. You might be able to argue with someone's personal theory, but you cannot argue with a tape measure. To keep things organized, we are using a framework built on 3 measurable categories that will drive this entire investigation. First, we look at structural dimensions, which includes things like vault heights, how far apart the columns are, and how thick the walls are compared to what the surface blueprints actually specify. Second, we analyze the acoustic properties of these spaces because things like reverberation time and frequency response are determined by the geometry of the room and can tell us exactly what a space was originally designed for. Third, we examine the geographic alignment by looking at the compass bearings and the spatial relationships between these hidden chambers across different cities. We then cross-reference those findings against the street grids, property lines, and railroad layouts that existed during that time. These 3 categories are vital because they are all independently verifiable, meaning you do not have to take my word for any of this. The 2016 survey from the Cincinnati Music Hall restoration is a public document anyone can read, and you can find acoustic studies of these historic buildings in various engineering journals. Geological survey data is sitting in state archives right now, and every single claim in this video can be traced back to a document you can pull for yourself. You might wonder why we are focusing so heavily on civic buildings like courthouses, post offices and train stations, but they are actually the perfect sample set for a few specific reasons. These buildings have the most complete paper trails of any 19th century structures, and since federal and local governments kept detailed labour logs and material invoices, we should see records of the dirt being hauled away. If these massive underground spaces were dug out during the official construction window, there would be a clear trail of labour costs and inspection reports to prove it. On top of that, these buildings are usually more accessible than private property, which means we have plenty of modern engineering assessments to look at. The pattern that makes this worth your time is very specific. In city after city, the documented excavation depth and the actual measured depth of the basement levels do not match up. We are seeing margins of 20 to 50 feet of missing history, which is far too large to be a simple mistake or a case of poor record keeping on a few isolated projects. When this same discrepancy shows up in Chicago, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati and St. Louis across different decades, the error itself becomes the most important piece of data we have. Before we start walking through these individual buildings, we need to be very precise about what these official records actually say, and more importantly, what they always seem to leave out. Construction records for 19th century civic buildings usually describe underground spaces in one of 2 ways. They are either foundation systems, which are the structural pieces that move the weight of the building into the ground, or they are utility corridors built to hold water lines and mechanical gear. These 2 categories cover every single thing the official documents acknowledge, but they completely ignore a 3rd category that keeps showing up when people actually go down there to measure. Take the Cincinnati Music Hall, which was finished in 1878, as a starting point for this problem. The original paperwork describes a standard foundation and a network of brick drainage channels running under the building, which is exactly what you would expect for a project from that era. However, when a restoration survey went into those subsurface spaces in 2016 to check the structural health before a renovation, the team found something else entirely. They documented vaulted brick chambers where the ceilings measured between 14 and 28 feet high, and the total footprint of these rooms stretched far beyond the recorded boundaries of the building. The survey report even flags these dimensions as being totally inconsistent with the construction drawings, because while the records describe narrow drainage channels, the survey team found massive rooms. The word rooms is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, so we need to be clear about what actually makes a room different from a simple corridor. It is not just about how high the ceiling is, but rather the relationship between height, width and length, and whether those proportions look like a designed space or just a functional passage. A utility corridor is sized so a person can get in to fix a pipe, not for people to live or work in, and the chambers beneath Cincinnati Music Hall are not shaped for simple access. The vault heights and the way the arches span the space are designed to spread weight across a huge interior volume, which is a specific engineering choice that requires a completely different design approach than a basement. Sluis Union Station was completed in 1894, and it shows us an even more specific version of this same mystery. The column bases in the lower levels are sized to hold vertical loads that structural engineers have pointed out are way too heavy for the buildings sitting on top of them. Column bases are supposed to distribute a specific amount of weight into the ground, so if you over-engineer them, you are either wasting money or you are planning for a weight that is not there yet. The building sitting above those columns is just a single-story train shed, but the bases beneath it are sized for something much heavier, and the construction records do not explain this because they do not even admit the bases exist at those sizes. This brings us to the idea of orphaned infrastructure, which is a useful way to describe these hidden elements. Orphaned infrastructure refers to underground structures that have no purpose related to the surface building in any permit or construction log, meaning they are physically there but totally absent from the documents. At the Cincinnati site, you have vaulted chambers that show up in a modern survey but not in the 1878 records, and at Sluis you have columns built for a weight the building does not have. Neither of these examples is a small mistake or a minor difference in measurement, but rather a total disconnect between reality and the record. The actual scale of this gap is what really matters, because the official records describe utility tunnels with ceilings around 8 or 10 feet high. That height makes sense if you are just running pipes and need enough room for a worker to stand up, but the measured heights in the real spaces go from 14 feet all the way up to 30 feet in the bigger chambers. A draftsman does not accidentally forget to include 20 vertical feet in a drawing, and a construction crew does not dig out 30 feet of earth and then write down that they only dug 10. This mismatch between the number in the book and the number on the tape measure is not a result of being sloppy, but instead it shows that the documents are describing something other than what was actually built. Dimensions prove that the records are wrong, but they do not tell us what these spaces were actually for, and that is where the science of acoustics comes into the picture. Acoustic properties are not just a matter of opinion or how a room feels when you walk into it. Sound is determined by geometry, which means the height, width and length of a space combined with the wall materials to create a specific echo and frequency response. If you change the shape of the room, you change the sound, which means you can also work backward by measuring the sound to figure out what the room was designed to do. This is a standard tool for people who work in architectural acoustics, and they use it all the time to fix historic concert halls or set up rooms for recording. The math behind it is solid and is not something people argue about, because reverberation time is calculated the same way no matter who is doing the work. Standard structures like cisterns and utility tunnels have very predictable sound signatures because they are built for efficiency and not for how they sound. A water storage tank or a drainage tunnel usually has curved walls and low ceilings that create a flat, dead acoustic environment where sound just bounces around randomly. Nobody designing a sewer is worried about the quality of the echo, so sound behavior is never a priority when you are building basic infrastructure. However, several of the underground chambers in this study do not have those dead acoustic signatures at all. Their measured echoes and frequency responses fall into the same ranges that engineers expect to find in performance halls or large assembly rooms. These are spaces where the geometry was clearly worked out to manage how sound moves, which suggests that the people who built them were thinking about acoustics from the very beginning. The best example of this is the Allegheny County Courthouse in Pittsburgh, which was finished in 1888. The records say the underground level is just a drainage and utility system, but acoustic tests done during later repairs found something strange. The reverberation times in the larger chambers were exactly what you would find in a room built for music or speaking, and a drainage system simply does not need that kind of controlled sound harm. These properties do not just happen by accident because they are the result of very specific decisions about the size and shape of the room during the design phase. This is the point that makes it hard to use easy excuses like safety margins or contractor preferences. You can say a foundation was built extra strong just to be safe, but you cannot argue that a room accidentally ended up with the perfect acoustics for a concert hall. Since reverberation is a direct result of the room's volume and surfaces, you have to get the dimension exactly right to get a specific sound. The Allegheny chambers were not sized for water or pipes, and the acoustics are the physical proof of that, regardless of what the blueprints say. The logic here is pretty simple and does not leave much room for debate. If the sound of a room does not match what it was supposedly built for, then either the records are lying or the room was changed immediately after it was built. Since the acoustics are baked into the physical walls and the geometry was set when the bricks were laid, there was no time to change it. You would have to tear the whole room down and rebuild it to change the way it sounds, and we know for a fact that nobody did that. The dimensions show us that the records are wrong about the size of these places, and the acoustics show us the records are wrong about their purpose. This leads to a much bigger question about why this same pattern of incorrect records keeps showing up in so many different cities. While the measurements and acoustic data come from studying individual buildings on their own, the alignment evidence is a different beast entirely because you can only see it when you step back and look at several cities at once. Mapping out the underground chamber footprints for civic buildings across 6 different cities, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Chicago, Cleveland and Buffalo, reveals a spatial pattern in the tunnels that simply does not exist in anything built above ground. These subterranean passages follow consistent compass bearings that ignore property lines, cut right under public streets, and even pass beneath private lots owned by people who had absolutely no connection to the city construction projects on either side of them. Those property lines are a massive deal because they represent legal boundaries that people did not just ignore in the late 19th century. Any underground work crossing a property line requires a paper trail of documented easements, signed agreements, and official permits, and we have that paperwork for every single sewer line or telegraph conduit laid during this era. Municipal governments in the 1880s and 90s were incredibly careful about infrastructure records because property disputes were expensive and could ruin a political career, yet the tunnels connecting these specific civic buildings have no such documentation. It is not a case of lost or messy files, but rather a complete lack of any record that they were ever planned or permitted. The compass bearings make this even more confusing for anyone trying to explain them away. Street grids in American cities back then followed 2 basic rules. They either lined up with cardinal directions if the land was flat, or they followed natural landmarks like rivers and ridges if the terrain was rough. These subsurface corridors do not follow either of those logics, as their bearings fail to match the surface streets above them or the railroad lines that dictated how all 6 of these cities grew. Whatever spatial plan organized these underground passages, it clearly was not based on the surface geography that city engineers were actually working with at the time. This leaves us with a very small number of possible explanations for what we are seeing. Either these underground corridors were planned and built completely separate from the surface infrastructure, which would mean a secret, unrecorded project created a massive layout across multiple states, or the corridors were already sitting there when the cities were built, and the civic buildings were placed specifically to connect to them. The geological data makes that first option almost impossible to believe. In several spots where these tunnels run between buildings, soil samples taken during modern utility work show perfectly layered earth with no signs of the massive disruption you would expect from a large excavation. When you dig a tunnel through the earth, you compress the soil around it and create distinct marks in the layers that stay visible for well over a century. Geotechnical engineers look for these patterns every day when they check a site for new construction, but in multiple locations along these specific tunnel paths, that expected disturbance is nowhere to be found. Soil profiles next to these passages show no evidence that anyone ever removed the massive amount of dirt required to create these spaces. You simply cannot move that much earth without leaving a trace, as the material has to be hauled away and its absence leaves permanent marks in the surrounding ground. This rules out a very specific scenario. These corridors were not dug by the construction crews named in the building permits during the years those permits were active. The geological record does not show it, the property records do not allow for it, and the compass bearings do not match any planning tools those 19th century crews were using. By this point you have three different types of evidence, all pointing toward the same strange conclusion. The dimensions are physically wrong for their stated purpose, the acoustics do not fit the jobs they were supposedly built for, and the alignments cross legal boundaries that were never coordinated. When you stack those facts together, the real question is not whether the history books are missing a few pages, but rather what kind of massive gap we are actually staring at. We have three separate measurements and three different ways of looking at the data, yet they all lead to the exact same missing piece of information. At this stage, we do not have to wonder if something is wrong with the official story, because the physical evidence has already proven that the records are incorrect. The real task now is to figure out what the physical facts actually allow us to conclude and what they force us to throw away. If we look only at the constraints instead of trying to invent a wild theory, there are really only two ways to explain the whole pattern. Either these chambers were built at the same time as the buildings above them using secret resources and a hidden planning committee that left no paper trail in any city, or they were already there when the 19th century crews arrived. In that second scenario, the builders simply integrated the existing structures into their new foundations without ever writing down what they had discovered underground. The actual construction timelines make that first option look like a total fantasy. Many of these massive civic buildings were finished in less than 18 months, which was incredibly fast for the 1880s and 90s considering the constant labour shortages and material delays mentioned in old contractor letters. If you try to add the massive underground excavation required for these chambers into that same tight window, the math simply stops working. You cannot rush a giant monument to completion while also digging 30-foot vaulted rooms underneath it with the same crew and the same budget without seeing a massive jump in labour costs or material orders. The financial records from these projects are still around and they show no such spike in spending. The second idea, the found infrastructure theory, actually fits the physical facts much better than the official story. If the chambers were already in the ground when the crews started, the builders did not need to spend time or money digging them out, which explains why the timelines were so short and why there is no record of dirt being hauled away. It also explains why the column bases were built to hold weight that the surface buildings do not even produce, because those supports were not designed for the buildings we see today. They were built to work with whatever was already down there. Even the strange acoustic shapes start to make sense if you assume these rooms were designed for a specific use rather than being built as high-end drainage pipes. Now this theory does not tell us who built the chambers originally or when they were put there, but this specific analysis is not meant to answer that yet. Being honest about what we do not know is a vital part of the process, and right now the physical constraints are much tighter than any explanation we have for them. What we can definitely prove from the evidence is how the official records behaved. The fact that these spaces were mislabeled is not just a random mistake. Calling a 28-foot vaulted room a drainage corridor is not a typo made by one sleepy clerk. It is a consistent pattern that shows up in different cities over 30 years under dozens of different governments and architects. That consistency tells us that the decision to describe these structures as simple utilities was a deliberate choice rather than a simple oversight. The best part is that you have everything you need to go and check these facts for yourself without needing anyone's permission. The 2016 restoration survey for the Cincinnati Music Hall is a matter of public record, and the acoustic studies of the Allegheny County Courthouse are right there in engineering journals. You can find the geological data in state archives and look up the property records at any county office. You do not need a special degree or a secret clearance to see the gap between what the buildings are and what the history books say they are. The structures are still standing, the documents are still public, and the massive hole in our history is still waiting for an honest explanation. The physical measurements tell one story while the paperwork tells another, and that massive gap still exists today in the ground of cities you can visit and records you can read. Nobody has managed to explain away these contradictions yet. Subscribe if you enjoy deep dives that prioritize hard evidence over easy answers, and send this to anyone who refuses to accept the official story without double-checking the math first.